Where are you watching from tonight? I'm always amazed to see how far these stories travel across the world. If you're enjoying them, kindly subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything. In the waning glow of a London afternoon, when the clatter of carriage wheels blended with the distant chime of church bells, Lady Eleanor Hargrave descended the steps of her family's townhouse with the composure of someone who had learned to fold disappointment into her posture. For seasons of failed hopes had worn smooth the edges of her anticipation, leaving in its place a quiet resolve that society mistook for meekness. She understood that the night ahead would unfold as all others had, a ballroom filled with laughter, music drifting through chandeliers, and a long stretch of solitude waiting for her beneath the gilded ceilings. Yet she dressed for it with unwavering grace, as though beauty alone could refute the whispers that shadowed her name. The scandal, once a spark, had grown into a blaze that consumed her prospects before she grasped the full cruelty of its reach. Her father's death revealed mismanaged accounts and debts no one had foreseen, and London, ever hungry for talk, turned its gaze upon her with merciless curiosity. Though she bore none of the blame, the stain on the Hargrave reputation proved indelible. Invitations still arrived out of politeness, but marriage offers vanished as swiftly as they had once bloomed, and friends who had sworn loyalty slipped away with practiced ease. Eleanor learned to meet each cool glance with a gentle smile, refusing to surrender her dignity. She had been 17 when she first entered society, her eyes bright with the belief that kindness would be returned in equal measure. Now, at 21, she possessed a calm that made her seem older than her years, a serenity born of survival rather than acceptance. Each ball became a test of endurance, and though she passed them with quiet strength, she felt the weight of every unclaimed dance press upon her. Still, she continued to appear, not out of naive hope but an unspoken challenge to those who expected her to hide. If society wished to watch her wither, she would do so in full view. The Hargrave name, once spoken with admiration, now carried the echo of imprudence, and Eleanor's presence at any gathering invited hushed assessments. Mothers steered sons away with graceful precision, daughters mirrored their elders' disdain. Yet Eleanor never returned their cruelty. She carried herself with the poise her mother had taught her long before illness stole the woman away, holding her chin level even when whispers curled behind her. If she felt loneliness, she concealed it beneath a practiced stillness. Despite the ache of isolation, she found small rebellions to sustain her. She memorized the shape of every ballroom, the pattern of marble floors, the way candlelight shimmered along gilded moldings. She listened to music not as accompaniment to a dance she would never be offered, but as a private solace. Her invisibility granted her access to truths others overlooked, though she rarely knew what to do with them beyond storing them in a quiet corner of her mind. Yet beneath her calm stirred an exhaustion she dared not name. She had never expected happiness to be handed to her easily, but she had hoped for fairness, for a future that felt like her own. Instead, she lived in the shadow of a misdeed she had not committed, her worth measured by figures scribbled in vanished ledgers. The cruelty of it might have broken someone less resolute, but Eleanor endured because she refused to let despair claim her final corner of hope. Though she did not know it, others had noticed her perseverance. When she entered a room, a few, too cautious to admit it, admired the dignity with which she faced each slight. Their gazes lingered longer than intended, drawn by the strength beneath her gentle manner. Yet admiration, paired with fear of scandal, rarely turned into action. Society thrived on conformity, and aligning with a fallen family demanded courage few possessed. Eleanor accepted this without bitterness, understanding that resentment was merely another chain. Still, fate had begun its subtle work. In the weeks before the Duchess of Rothbury's winter ball, conversations stirred with mentions of a man long absent from society, the Duke of Blackthorn. His name, spoken in tones of awe or apprehension, moved through parlors and gentlemen's clubs, accompanied by rumors of a duel abroad and a grief he carried like a concealed wound. Eleanor heard these stories in fragments and felt a chill each time someone uttered his title. She had never met him, yet the air seemed to shift whenever he was discussed. As the evening approached when their paths would cross, Eleanor sensed a faint restlessness within herself, though she attributed it to fatigue. She had no reason to expect change, no cause to believe her life would deviate from the pattern it had followed for years. And yet, as her maid fastened the last pearl at her throat on the night of the Duchess's ball, she felt a subtle tremor, like a breath drawn in the dark. It lingered as she stepped into her carriage, as the wheels turned toward a house glittering with anticipation, and as the city lights flickered past like distant stars. By the time she reached the entrance of Rothbury House, the tremor had settled into her bones, neither welcome nor feared but simply present, an unnamed herald of change. Eleanor paused on the threshold, listening to the swelling music beyond the grand doors, and allowed herself one small hope, that tonight, if nothing else, she might feel less unseen. It was a modest wish, fragile yet persistent, and it carried her forward as she stepped into the golden light, unaware that the world she knew had already begun to shift. The Duchess of Rothbury's ballroom seemed to breathe with its own opulent life, a vast chamber of mirrored walls and trembling candlelight where music drifted like silk through the air. Eleanor stepped inside with a familiar blend of composure and apprehension, expecting nothing beyond another quiet vigil. Around her, gowns swept across polished marble, laughter scattered like jeweled confetti, and conversations rippled with a practiced rhythm of people certain of their place. She moved with polite intention toward the line of chaperones near the wall, knowing she would remain undisturbed. Yet something in the atmosphere felt tauter than usual, as though the night awaited an intrusion neither welcomed nor feared. Whispers coursed through the crowd before Eleanor understood their cause. A subtle shift in posture moved from one group to another, the social tide pulling attention toward the entrance. She resisted the instinct to follow their gaze until murmurs of a single title reached her, the Duke of Blackthorn. The name, spoken with soft trepidation, stirred the unease she had felt earlier. When she finally looked, she saw a figure framed by the grand archway, tall and severe, as if carved from the very shadows clinging to the corridor behind him. Conversation dimmed at the edges, not from awe but from a collective uncertainty about what his presence demanded. The Duke carried himself with a disquieting stillness, as though movement were something granted rather than given. His dark coat swept behind him with each deliberate step, and his gaze, sharp yet unreadable, moved across the assembly like a silent interrogation. Eleanor felt it brush past her, not stopping, yet leaving behind a faint tremor that unsettled her practiced calm. She knew little of him beyond rumor, but the fragments she had gathered, loss, conflict, exile, wove an unsettling portrait. Still, nothing about him suggested recklessness. Instead, he seemed a man accustomed to battles waged in quiet rooms, battles that left no scars visible to those who judged from afar. He did not approach immediately, though several matrons hovered in hopeful clusters, eager to secure even a moment of his attention for their daughters. The Duke offered no acknowledgment, his focus seemingly elsewhere, as though he searched for something he could neither name nor ignore. Eleanor tried to look away, not wishing to appear curious, but found her attention drawn back with a reluctant pull she resented. She had spent years perfecting invisibility, and the last thing she desired was to be seen inadvertently. Yet the shifting current of the room suggested that tonight no one would remain untouched by the Duke's arrival. When the orchestra shifted into a sweeping waltz, the crowd reconfigured itself, couples forming with instinctive ease. Eleanor settled at her usual place near the mirrored wall, fingers lightly resting on her folded fan. She expected the familiar ache of exclusion, yet found herself strangely alert, as though the air carried a warning. The Duke began to move, threading through the dancers with a certainty that made people part before him. His steps were unhurried but purposeful, and while many followed his progress with thinly veiled hope, his gaze remained fixed ahead. Eleanor felt the shift before she understood it. He was walking toward her. A hush spread in his wake, subtle yet undeniable. Eleanor's pulse quickened, though she forced herself to maintain her stillness, unwilling to reveal confusion. Her surroundings blurred, only the measured rhythm of his approach remained clear. When he stopped before her, the room seemed to constrict around them, as though the air itself held its breath. His expression was unreadable, but there was no cruelty in it, only a gravity that unsettled her more than disdain ever had. For a moment, neither spoke, though Eleanor sensed he weighed his next words with great care, as if aware of the consequences tightly coiled around them both. "Dance with me," he said, the words low enough that only she could hear them. For a heartbeat, Eleanor wondered whether she had imagined the invitation, for nothing in his manner suggested a desire for spectacle. Yet his extended hand, steady and unmistakable, confirmed the reality she scarcely believed. Panic and disbelief twisted within her, tangled with something dangerously close to yearning. Accepting meant scrutiny, refusal meant insult, and either choice would shape the night in ways she could not foresee. Still, her hesitation was brief, for she sensed sincerity beneath his composed exterior, a sincerity that struck her more deeply than she expected. When she placed her hand in his, a tremor passed through her, subtle but undeniable. The Duke inclined his head, as though acknowledging a pact formed in silence, then guided her toward the center of the ballroom. The dancers drew aside instinctively, forming a widening circle that exposed them to every gaze. The orchestra faltered for the briefest moment before recovering, its melody swelling with renewed urgency. Eleanor felt the world sharpen into unbearable clarity. The warmth of his gloved hand, the steadiness of his breath, the faint scent of pine and winter air clinging to his coat. She did not feel chosen, she felt seen. As they began to turn, the first steps of their waltz unfurled with an ease that startled her. His movements were steady, controlled, guiding without constraint, and Eleanor found herself following with an instinct she had never experienced on a dance floor. The murmurs encircling them thickened, a storm of speculation, but none of it reached her fully. She sensed only the cadence of the music and the unwavering steadiness of the man leading her. Though she barely knew him, a peculiar trust blossomed, fragile yet undeniable. Whatever compelled him to choose her, it was not pity, and that realization steadied the trembling in her chest. By the time the final notes dissolved into silence, Eleanor sensed that nothing in her life would return to its former stillness. As the Duke released her hand, the room exhaled around them, yet a promise lingered, one that beckoned them both toward whatever waited next. The silence that followed the last note of their waltz clung to Eleanor like a second skin, delicate yet impossible to ignore. She felt the Duke's steady gaze upon her even after he released her hand, as though he were assessing something he had long suspected but only now confirmed. Around them, conversation erupted in abrupt, scattered bursts, astonishment sharpened by envy and alarm. Eleanor sensed the ballroom's shifting temperament with painful clarity, each sideways glance a reminder that the Duke's choice had placed her squarely back into the brutal center of society's attention. Yet she found, to her faint surprise, that she did not shrink from it. Confusion wove through her, but beneath it lay a quiet strength stirred by the dance, as though some dormant part of her had finally stepped into the light. The Duke did not move to escort her away, nor did he vanish behind the shield of indifference most men in his position would have summoned. Instead, he remained before her, studying her with the calm focus of someone who rarely allowed himself impulse. His expression revealed little, but there was a subtle intensity there, something measured, searching, almost solemn. Eleanor held his gaze longer than propriety allowed, compelled by a question too new to name. Before either could speak, a cluster of matrons approached under the guise of polite curiosity, though their eyes brimmed with thinly veiled accusation. The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and with a slight bow, he stepped back, giving Eleanor space yet not quite releasing her from his sphere. Their departure left her exposed to the scrutiny she had expected. Lady Fortinrose, the first to reach her, offered a brittle smile that carried neither warmth nor sincerity. "My dear Lady Eleanor," she murmured, her voice coated with a sweetness that belied its sharpness, "what an unexpected delight to see you on the floor. His Grace seems to have unconventional tastes this season." A murmur of agreement followed, soft enough to feign innocence, yet pointed enough to wound. Eleanor met their gaze with the composure she had learned to wield in place of armor, refusing to grant them the spectacle they sought. If they expected her to falter, she would force them to endure her calm instead. But beneath her serenity lay a tangle of unanswered questions. Why had the Duke chosen her, out of all the women in the room? What compelled a man with his formidable reputation to risk aligning himself with someone already marked by scandal? The act had not been impulsive, she sensed deliberation behind it. That uncertainty both steadied and unsettled her, pressing at the edges of her newly rekindled hope. The night continued on, but her thoughts remained fixed on the silent exchange that had passed between them on the dance floor. Before she could regain her bearings, the Duke of Blackthorn reappeared, not beside her, but near enough to make the room shift again. This time, he did not address her directly. Instead, he spoke quietly with the Duchess of Rothbury, who listened with raised brows and a keen interest Eleanor did not fully understand. When the Duchess glanced briefly in Eleanor's direction, an unmistakable spark of intrigue flickered across her face. Whatever had transpired, it seemed Eleanor's solitude was no longer a settled certainty. As the night waned, the Duke approached her once more, though his expression held a new gravity. He paused at a respectful distance, waiting for her acknowledgement before continuing. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice low but steady, "my apologies for the attention I have inadvertently drawn to you. I did not intend to place you in discomfort." She searched his face, noting the sincerity threaded through his words. Rather than anger, what she found there was something closer to remorse, or perhaps recognition. It softened the tension she had carried since their dance, though it did not lessen her curiosity. "You need not apologize, Your Grace." Her reply emerged more confidently than she expected. "I have endured far sharper discomforts these past years." This, in truth, was the least painful among them. His expression shifted, a faint shadow crossing it. She feared she had spoken too plainly, revealing more grief than she intended, yet the Duke did not recoil. Instead, he regarded her with a quiet, thoughtful intensity that felt painfully near to understanding. "Your resilience does not go unnoticed," he said. "London may overlook what does not serve its interests, but some of us see far more than we are expected to." The words struck her with an unsettling resonance, as though he spoke not merely of observation but of kinship. She wondered then, had he, too, been made invisible by rumor? The thought unsettled her, for it suggested a depth to him she had not anticipated. Their conversation was brief, for propriety demanded restraint, yet it left behind a lingering impression. When he bowed and withdrew, Eleanor felt the absence of his presence more sharply than she wished to admit. The night continued, but she moved through it with a sense of heightened awareness, every glance, whisper, and breath reminding her that something essential had shifted between them, even if neither fully understood its shape. When the ball finally drew to its close, Eleanor found herself standing beside one of the tall arched windows overlooking the frost-glittered gardens. She breathed in the cold air seeping through the glass, steadying herself against the swell of conflicting emotions. The dance had changed nothing tangible. Society would not suddenly forget her father's disgrace, nor would her prospects bloom overnight. Yet something intangible had altered, an awakening she could neither dismiss nor fully grasp. She feared it as much as she cherished it. As she prepared to leave, she sensed a presence behind her. Turning, she found the Duchess herself, regarding her with a contemplative expression. "My dear," the older woman said softly, "London is prone to misjudgments. But now and then, it is forced to reconsider." Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, but the Duchess squeezed her hand lightly before she could speak. "Do not let tonight frighten you. Let it remind you that even the most rigid opinions can shift when least expected." Eleanor stepped into the cold night, her breath forming small clouds in the air. The carriage awaited, the same one that had carried her to countless evenings of disappointment. Yet tonight she entered it with a different heart, one marked not by certainty but by possibility. As the wheels began their slow turn toward home, she pressed her gloved hand against her chest, feeling the quiet thrum of a future she could not yet name. Whatever lay ahead, the world no longer felt entirely closed to her. And somewhere within that truth, hope, long dormant, began, at last, to stir.